from the All Indiana Podcast Network.
It's time for real conversation about the real issues that affect our communities.
Poverty, education, equality, and more.
This is Real Talk.
Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Welcome to Real Talk on the All Indiana Podcast Network. I am Reverend Charles Harrison with Reverend Tyre Webster Sr. And on today's show, we will follow up on the Tyre Nichols killing in Memphis by 5 Memphis police officers allegedly, and the fallout of that when it comes to policing in America today. Thank you so much for joining us today on Real Talk. And I'm Reverend Charles Harrison, and with me is my co-host, Reverend Tyre Webster Sr. Welcome, Reverend Webster.
Thank you, Pastor Charles Harrison, my friend and my brother. I am glad to be co-hosting. Forgive my voice today, going through some allergies.
Oh, okay.
But I'm glad to be co-hosting with you. You've been my friend and brother for a long time, and I think it's about time now that we get together with you.
All right. Well, listen, me and you had a conversation and was following up on the Tyre Nichols killing in Memphis, allegedly by the 5 police officers, in Memphis, and really dealing with the fallout of that. What is the implications? And certainly it is the national story. It has been for several weeks, and trying to figure out the fallout. A part of that was the Scorpion unit that those 5 officers were a part of was disbanded. I know there's been 1 or 2 other officers that have lost their jobs because of what happened that night. And, when you think in terms of what happened, certainly with what happened with George Floyd and many others, that, really led to the Black Lives Matter movement and this real concern in Black America about policing. And I guess we've never had a conversation, about this issue of policing. The Scorpion unit in Memphis was designed to try to help address the surging violence in the city of Memphis. I think they've had 3 consecutive years of 300 plus homicides. Several years ago, they broke a record for the number of homicides. So we have these 2 issues going on at the same time. The issue of the concern about police brutality, the misuse of police powers that tend to disproportionately impact people of color, particularly blacks, men and women, but yet we also have the issue of surging violence that is disproportionately impacting Black communities. And there seems to be this clash right now, an issue when it comes to policing and the concern about policing that is fair and just and equitable for Black Americans. So that was our conversation, and I'm going to kind of let you just kind of lead into what we were talking about, and let's have a conversation. I know that, I'm pretty moderate in my viewpoints, so my viewpoints are probably going to be a moderate compared to some in the Black community. I do... I am a volunteer chaplain with the state police, so I bring that perspective too.
Okay, thank you, Pastor Harrison. That's a good segue in, and that's a broad conversation. It's the conversation that's causing tension around our country right now. You know that. But first of all, let me just say clearly, we are for good policing, okay? Right. So to answer that question, in fact, in the Bible, Romans 13 talks about being subject to those who have the authority over us. So we believe in being subject to those who have authority over us. However, we also, I think the fallout have come from the way that it was handled. I think that's the fallout. Obviously, many of us around the country saw the body cam where the officers come up and just yank this young man out of the car. In fact, even the chief of police, even at this point, unless there's been new development over the last day or so, couldn't find any reason for the violation or the stoppage. So that being said, we just think that was totally handled wrong. And we feel that justice should be served to not just those police, but to all that are involved, because human life is valuable, and there's a premium on human life. So we want to set that record straight, and we want to set that claim straight, because we are not, in fact, the first person you're going to call in the event of trouble is the police. However, training and all of that kicks in, proper training and all that, and so we think that proper training is an issue. I think that accountability in that case, in Memphis case, I think accountability was major. There was, from what we've seen, a very poor supervision on the scene. As a matter of fact, from what I understand, is that the Memphis department already have a policy in place that when there's access police force by one officer, that the other officer on the scene should step in and prevent that. That's already a Memphis policy, and it's probably an Indianapolis policy as well. However, that did not happen. We didn't even see that. So as a result, this is what we have. So I think when you talk about what we're seeing today with police, what we're seeing a lack of accountability, and we're seeing poor training being exercised. And with that in mind, poor training and a lack of accountability, then we're going to have what we have in our communities. You and I are accountable in the fears that we serve in, and certainly I think police should be held accountable. In fact, I might say, and this is just me, I may say that I was not for the total banding of this department. I think that it should be, again, training and proper training in accountability. A reason being is that if we have those that are a nuisance to our community and crime spiking and escalating, then the officers should be able to do their job. However, they should know their job and know, and again, accountability, where if there is a unit on the scene and one officer has gone overboard, I think somebody should have the courage to step up and say, hey, back off. That's not happening. It didn't happen in the George Floyd situation. It didn't happen in this situation. So therefore, justice should be served.
I think part of the concern, I think, from the residents in Memphis that you're hearing stories, certainly when it comes to these special units, they tend to be focused on areas where you have the highest level of crime and violence, which tends to be in what we call the urban core, or in areas that tend to be predominantly black. So there tended to be a history, from what we are being told, of this unit maybe not exercising their authority as police officers properly. So I'm somewhat in agreement with you. Could it been, when we look at what happened, this unit, could it have been revamped where there was greater supervision? Because my concern is, what now is the Memphis Police Department going to do about the still spiking crime and violence that is also disproportionately impacting the black community? So, we try to fix a problem by eliminating a unit that was supposed to be working to address those who are terrorizing our neighborhood. But with that unit now disbanded, what now takes its place, and how do we address the concerns of the community when you still have surging shootings, stabbings, and homicides in Memphis, and that's probably reflective all over the country. We know that that's a problem in Indianapolis, with the surging violence, and we're on a pace now, right now, equaling the 2021 numbers, which was a record-breaking year of 271 homicides. So, Reverend Webster, this seems to be a problem all over the country. What is the correct balance? And I think that's what we're struggling with as a nation, as cities, as political leaders, and then leaders within the black community. What is the correct balance?
Really, when you ask, could it have been revamped versus disbanding? Probably I would have had, if it was me at the top, I probably would have a heart-to-heart conversation with my chiefs, with those who are in charge of the unit supervision, and began to see do the data tracking of this unit. And if for example, there was a young man that said that he had just almost experienced the same thing a few days ago by this same unit. So I think versus disbanding the unit, I think the powers to be should really be investigating the unit themselves internally to see if these are valid complaints, and if they were valid complaints, then at the top, do the dismissal, do the things that need to be done, because at the end of the day, we still need safe communities. And at the end of the day, the officers are called, whether you are plainclothes, whether you are a specialized unit, they're still called to help keep the law of the land. And so I think that things should have been done internally, because, as you said, now what happens if let's just look through the lens of a criminal. If I see that the unit is disbanded right now, that may even give me more of a incentive to go and continue to do violence, because I realize that I'm not being watched as close now, Pastor Harrison. So I think we got to find a balance. And even though these 5 men really broke the law, and perhaps some of the authority has been overreached, I still think that we should perhaps go back to the drawing board, even if we want to rename the unit. But I think we should go back to the drawing board, because when I looked at what the Scorpion stood for, don't have the alliterations right now, but when I look for what they stood for, the principles sounded good to me and fair. Now, are they exercising fairness? Obviously not. So I think, again, there's my key word, accountability. I think officers should be held accountable. Chiefs should be held accountable. So I think that it's a matter of, I honestly think we have an accountability problem.
Within law enforcement. This is Real Talk with Reverend Terry Webster Sr. and Reverend Charles Harrison. One of the questions I wanted to ask, and since we're talking about this issue of accountability, how surprised was you that these were 5 black officers? Because most of the concern that we have seen tended to, be white officers that, operated outside what many would say their authority as police officers, and exercise violence against unarmed black males that led to their death. What role does that play in this, or does it play any role in this whole concern about law enforcement? Because you talked about the lack of accountability, the poor training that you see as factors in what led to this. I think I've heard from some in the black community, they were shocked that it happened to be 5 black men that exercised that kind of inhumane treatment of another human being.
I think that's one of the far outcries, Pastor Harrison, is that it was five black. When I heard it, I just knew. When I sit in my recliner in my chair without them showing, I just knew that here we go again with overuse of force on black men.
Right.
So that's what I thought. But when I found out that these were black men, it really broke my heart. It even took me deeper into my disparity, which says to me again, the system needs to be held accountable because sooner or later you can easily become the thing that you're fighting. If we're fighting against injustice, we certainly can become the monster ourselves. And so I was surprised, hurt, but I don't think that these officers should be held at any lower of a standard.
Right.
Now, the thing is that took place, which leads me to a concern again, is that this situation with these black officers was handled within probably 20 days. A swift, as the chief would say, a swift conclusion into justice, which I commend the chief for doing that. But it raises another concern of mine. If 5 black men, and now more allegedly to be charged, could be brought to swift justice without a whole lot of not releasing the body cam, going back and looking, editing the body cam and all that, and then moving along to swift justice. If that can happen in this case, it raised the question for me: how come swift justice is not happening in these other overreach cases and overreach situations and incidents where young black men have lost their lives, and in some cases we got to go through delayed justice to get justice. So again, I was equally surprising that the chief came right out and said we're going to move to swift justice. So it says to me again, even though it was 5 blacks and it broke my heart to do that, but also equally so, I think still we need to fix a broken system.
So the system is broken, and I think the question becomes, how do we fix the system? Because I think the truth is, how many of these police officers, and we're having an honest conversation, are scared and concerned themselves that are working in these high crime areas? And is that a trigger that causes them sometimes to act in a way that is inhumane? Because what doesn't get any attention, I just got back from New York City, and sadly an officer was shot and killed, 26 years old, with 3 children, and died. He was in the hospital. And I do know that there are some fears out there because of the high level of violence. And I'm trying to figure out, what does the training need to look like? Because I agree with you, there has to be accountability. You cannot, these officers were took the oath to serve and protect and abide by the Constitution, and it doesn't matter who the person is, even a suspect deserves to be treated with dignity. Regardless of how dangerous you think they are, because your job is to maintain the Constitution, and they only are an alleged suspect, and until they are convicted, that's all they are. And I think there is a concern, and part of my concern, Pastor Webster, is I think the level of violence that we're seeing every day on the television station in every major city in the country, the face of the black man has now become the face of crime and violence in this country. And I felt that way probably over the last 20 years or more, that's been the problem. So as we are afraid of us, how afraid of us is law enforcement?
So I think law enforcement, Pastor Harrison, they go through several weeks of training, and in that training, I have been fortunate to take the Citizens Academy, and we went through 6 weeks of the Citizens Academy, and Citizens Academy helps us think through the lenses of an officer. And the Citizens Academy even said we even shot the guns and even went to the shooting range as well, gun range. Talks about how a police officer has a split second,
right,
to make their minds up to act appropriately,
right,
in a situation. But also I think that being fearful. And yes, fearing your lives, but I think that shouldn't be an excuse to exercise good training. I think that walking up, snatching a person out the car right away without proper identification, without going through proper training, proper steps, I think those things cannot be avoided. Because then you're going to have an outcry of the community as we have now. So I think that, yes, the officer may be fearful, but I think the officer still have to go through proper training, actually take his proper steps, his training should kick in. And so because civilians just doesn't know that, and they haven't been in the academy, so they don't know what proper training looks like. And so, if they need more training, then there should be more training on properly handling stops and violence. For example,
was that a proper stop though? I'm in my experience with law enforcement and doing a stop, you normally walk up to the car and ask for identification.
Yeah.
You don't snatch someone out of the car. I mean, now if it's a felony stop, like units like that, then they may do that with guns and stuff. But this was supposed to be a stop of reckless driving, so their behavior, to me, was inappropriate from the very beginning.
Well, you have to go with what the police chief said. She said at that point, unless she's found something now,
right,
she have not found probable cause.
Right.
So we have to go with what the inside police department is saying. So
Right.
obviously, no, it wasn't a proper stop, which has led to these things. Now you asked about the face of black men being crime. Now, rework that, re-ask that question.
Well, I think because when you look at, and this is the reality of it, in Indianapolis last year, we had 230 homicides. 80% of those homicides was us.
Okay.
And that's what you're seeing all across the country, when you turn on the news, what do you see? What do you see most nights? And I think it has created in the community fear. When I walk in the morning time, sometimes, sometimes I run across, people who are walking, and you can tell they're fearful of me as they see me coming, whether it be a black female or a male. They do things to try to avoid coming in contact. Sometimes it means even walking across the street, and it seems to be this fear.
I really appreciate that, Pastor Harrison. Let me just say, it's a little deeper than that. In that perspective, I witnessed probably 2-3 weeks ago. I walked into my bank, and I bank in Whitestown, and I walked into my bank, and I lost my credit card. I thought I had lost my credit card,
right.
but But later on, my daughter found them. And they sent me to Lebanon, Indiana, which rerouted me to Brownsburg to the bank where I bank at.
Right.
And long story short, I was looked at and viewed a certain way, and I called back to the bank in Whitestown. I told one of my bankers, I said, look, I was really pretty much offended and very disappointed that how I was handled and how I was treated, pretty much. And I don't want to get into a whole dialogue on that. And then they sent me over to Brownsburg, because they print my cards right on the spot. And my wife was with me this time.
Right.
So this is another day. My wife was with me, so my wife observed some things. I felt the same way because me being a black man coming in and knowing how I was looked at. And finally, they asked, can I help you? And what I really believe is, personally, that, it wasn't until you start looking into my information that you really kind of settled down. It's unfortunately that you just said, it's unfortunately that today we have to feel that way. Mm-hmm. We have to feel that at our age and then younger, that we have to identify ourselves double.
Right.
Our motives have to be
right.
Our motives have to be really sought through before we can get the help we need. And if you and I are sensible, established men that have to feel that way, and have paid our dues to society as it relates to experience, how do we expect the young 16, 15-year-old to feel in a climate like this? So it's very real in the climate, and we can't skate around that. That we are made to feel that way. There are times that you and I both probably can go back to the profiling on the streets, coming home, being profiled. And we see it all the time. I had a barber say to me, my barber is down there 60 years old, and he said to me that he was in Memphis, and he said he looked the police in the eye, and this is, my barber is a good standard man. He said he looked the police in the eye and kept on driving. He said, and the police swung around and stopped him just because he made that eye contact.
But what does that say, Pastor Webster? And we get in the whole issue of where is policing today with the black community in a city that probably predominantly has a black police force. So, and I think we make the assumption sometimes that it's just white officers, but on the street, you hear those young men on the street who talk about their negative encounters with us, with people who look like us, that they tend to have this negative viewpoint of particularly young black males. And it is embodied in what I think happened with Tyre Nichols. Was I surprised by it when I thought about it? No, I wasn't. Because my experience has been, and what I hear on the streets, is that this happens more often than we are aware of.
That's unfortunate.
Right.
And it's really unfortunate. And you and I both know that really that's unfortunate. It almost seems like once we give you a little authority, once you complete your training, you have authority now, you forget where you come from. And certainly sometimes, as I said earlier, you become the monster that you're supposed to be fighting. And so if this is happening more times than we'd like to know, then I think that more conversation need to be had. I think that more conversation need to be had with law enforcement and those who are sensible leaders in our community, faith-based leaders, stakeholders. I think that more conversation have to be had to make sure that these things are not going on. And if they are going on, make sure they're not going to be tolerated, because that's just not good for our environment, our culture, if this is what's happening with law enforcement on the street, and especially black on black.
This is Real Talk with Reverend Terry Webster Sr. and Reverend Charles Harrison, and we're talking about the fallout of the Tyre Nichols killing in Memphis, allegedly by 5 black police officers, and its impact on policing in America. Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? Certainly there is a need for policing with the high levels of crime and violence that we're seeing in cities all across the country. But where do we go from here? I mean, there, over the last 10 years, there have been a lot of cases of misuse of police powers that has led to the death of several individuals, in cities across the country. Can these fences be mended so that we have, a good relationship with law enforcement, and law enforcement and community are working together to create safer communities? Or will we continue to have this tension between police and communities of color?
Good question. Where do we go? I think we got to really start right there with transparency. I think transparency, Pastor Harrison, is got to be the driver in community and law enforcement. Community needs transparency. We need to be accountable. When the officers need our voice, we need to raise it. And then when we need the officers' voice on issues, they need to raise it. I think it's got to be transparency. Years ago, when I was coming along, we used to have Officer Friendly. And Officer Friendly would come to the schools, and I don't know that that's still being done. And he would start right there at the grade school level, showing the children how he's there to support and there to be the covering, the protection, the law in our communities. I think we have to get back to where we're not afraid of the police,
right,
and the police are not afraid of us.
Right.
And if we do it together, the transparency, I just believe we can curtail a lot of the myth in our community. And then when we find out, I think it have to be certainly reiterated, enforced in police training, that we're not, as officers, we're not going to tolerate if you are treating any citizen in a unjust way. We're just not going to tolerate it. So I think transparency is key. It's crucial. I think it should be transparency from the police department, from the mayors, from public safety, from our community. There is a review board to review matters. I think that if the review board is just sitting there just to be rubber stamped, I think that needs to be cleaned up and rebuilt, because we got to have transparency so that we are not the police's enemy and the police is not our enemy.
You say that, and that was really excellent, because when I was in Brooklyn, New York, one of the things that really struck me is a relationship that seemed to have been built between leaders and the police department. You had a lot of black, police officers, a part of that, Hispanic, and others. But when the police officer was shot, there was an outcry from the community that also said to the rest of the community that this is not going to be tolerated, that we're not going to tolerate police shooting and killing us, and we're not going to tolerate us shooting and killing the police. And I think that's the kind of bridges that have to be built, in our community, that on either side is not going to be tolerated. When you put on that badge, and you take an oath to serve and protect. And that's what we expect you to do, to serve and protect, and to treat all human beings, all citizens, with dignity and respect. But on the other side, we expect our community to behave in a way where you're not taking the life of a police officer that has a family, and that cannot be tolerated either. And I think if we could ever get to that place, Pastor Webster, then maybe we could begin to heal what's broken, in many cities across the country when it comes to law enforcement and communities of color.
I like that you said if we could ever get to that place. We ought to never stop working to get to that place.
Right.
That ought to be a goal of ours, because again, every police officer has a right to return home to their families.
Right.
I have family members who are literally police officers.
Right.
And I know their heart because they're my family. And they're not bad police officers, but they have sworn an oath
Right.
to protect our community.
Right.
So unfortunately, it's some of those bad apples that
Right.
need to be weeded out
Right.
in law enforcement, so that our community can have that trust in law enforcement. But you flip it over. Unfortunately, we have apples in our community that's a whole nother conversation. You and I will be together for a while, so we can go to that
Right,
and family
right,
down the road.
right,
But also we need to say to our children at all ages, this is how you respect law enforcement. It's unfortunate that other cultures say that they are embarrassed, that they don't know what the talk is. Well, we know what the talk is,
Right,
and I've had
right.
that talk with my son, who is 30-something years old, 35 years old now, about if law enforcement stops you. And I had that one with him when he first started driving.
Right.
If law enforcement stops you, this is how you respond. So, and unfortunately...
But isn't that the way we were raised? I recall the conversations with my father, my grandfather, about what I was supposed to do if I was stopped. We didn't have... cell phones with cameras on them back then.
Yeah.
So that when you were out there, it was your word against their word. But we were trained what to do when we were stopped, even if it meant us getting arrested. My father and grandfather would always say to me that, let us handle it from there. If you get arrested, we'll come and get you out, and we'll handle that and bring the rest. Okay. Yes.
They listen. Well, that's because we were trained.
Right.
And unfortunately, as I said, this is another conversation for another day, but unfortunately, we have a whole generation of in our own community that are not training their children. Heck, they don't even know, they haven't even been trained themselves.
Right.
And so we got to get back to the whole issue of family. So I think these are some things that we can talk about down the road, solutions. Right. But let's go back. So if I had to have the talk with my son, let's go back to these 5 officers. Somewhere, probably these same 5 officers probably or should have had the talk from their parents.
Right.
So for you to come up and unjustly do what you've done with poor training, that's a heartbreaker.
Right.
Because now we cannot say, well, a white police officer did that.
Right.
This is a 5 black police officers doing this to one black man. And those kind of things ought not be tolerated. And there should be just a far outcry on that, as it is if it was 5 white officers doing it.
Well, I agree with you. I was just saddened by their lack of compassion, concern as Mr. Nichols laid against the car, handcuffed, and you could see he was in serious medical condition that I didn't know how severe it was, but is if they didn't care, they ignored it. They were more concerned about themselves, and I was so troubled by that. That this lack of compassion. They didn't treat that young man as if he was a human being, and that troubled me when it was us doing it to us, and I think I couldn't finish watching the videos once I seen that that last video. It was just hard to watch.
Well, again, Pastor Harrison, it comes back to going back to your training.
Right.
Because law enforcement is taught to put a subject down if it's a threat. But then they also are taught to try to save that subject's life.
Right.
So what we didn't see was them trying to help him when he was, Tyre, when he was in distress.
Right.
So again, we think that poor training was executed all the way around, or was not executed at all.
Right.
So as it relates to that, again, I think that these are things that we have to lift from that, and then say let's just talk about our law enforcement right here in Indianapolis, Indiana. And then to say to our law enforcement, let's make sure, what are we doing preventative to prevent that from happening here? And I think that we ought to look more into law enforcement training. If you're talking about building a safer community, yourself, you're a leader in the community. I'm a leader in the community in our own respective sides of town. And so our community trusts us. So if we're saying that we have seen certain standards, or we don't see certain standards, our community should be able to come to us with a voice for them. And so we want to build in our community with law enforcement a win-win, because we certainly would hate for law enforcement to turn a deaf ear if some of our babies are in trouble.
Well, certainly there are a couple cases here that certainly we need to discuss and have a conversation about, that have gone on here that have been somewhat controversial. We want to thank you for joining us today. This is the first time that, Reverend Terry Webster Sr. and myself have co-hosted the show together. We're going to be doing this together, and we're going to be bringing in all kind of people from different viewpoints. We believe that there is diversity within the Black community. We're not a monolithic community, but we believe we ought to have conversations about these issues in our community, and also, provide opportunities for other people to come in, whether it's talking about issues of education, employment, those things. So you're going to see a lot of that, but we want to thank you for joining us today on Real Talk, and we'll bring you more Real Talk that affects our community here in Indianapolis and across the country. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast and share it on Facebook and Twitter. This is Reverend Charles Harrison and
Pastor Terry Webster Sr.
All right, we'll see you again next week. We pray that you have a blessed and awesome day.
This is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast.
And be sure to check out other great podcasts on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Online now at allindianapodcast.com.